Hello, friends, and welcome to Short Story Saturday for the month of February. And I can't pronounce February, but there you go. So, the book this month was A Collection of Obsessions by Michael R. Fletcher. Mr. Fletcher, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so, we're going to go through each story of the book. So, if you have not read the stories, you're about to be spoiled on a bunch of them. So, just a heads up. I wanted to ask you before we get started on to get into each story about the cover. So, what was the inspiration for the cover?
So short stories and short story collections don't sell at all.
Hmm.
Like really, you get like a couple of hardcore fans buy them, but that's it. So I knew I had no budget for like hiring Felix or something I couldn't spend thousands of dollars on a cover because there was no way it was going to recoup. And my daughter is very much an artist and is constantly drawing. Now I think she was like 7 when she did the cover for this. And she did this piece of art um, with, the way she phrased it, sort of like the light and the dark together. And she had this whole like unicorn story where there was a dark side unicorn, a light side unicorn, and all this. It's kind of oddly complex story. Um, and when I saw that, I really wanted to use it as the cover art. And because I figured no one was going to buy it anyway. And and I don't mean that as a slight, but this was entirely for me.
Yeah.
I kind of didn't care what anyone else was gonna think. And the idea of having my daughter do the cover art for it uh was just more important than kind of anything else. And it
Hmm.
made her super happy, so that was good. And then she charged me. So mercenary little creep.
What was her fee? What did she charge you?
Okay, it was more than I was expecting.
Was it food and shelter? Was that the
No, she's like, I already get that for free, daddy. I want cash.
cash money?
Yeah.
And Harfoot is here. Hey, Harfoot, thanks for coming by. And
Great.
Star, thanks for coming by to say hello. And of course, Andres is always around. Thank you for your support. So, I know you mentioned about short story collections not selling very well. What was your what kind of was the what's kind of put in your mind? I want to publish these short stories, knowing that they may not be all that popular.
Right. So originally, like some of these short stories date back to 2008, 2009. And the first thing I ever wrote was a book called 88,
Mhm.
which later turned into Ghosts of Tomorrow. But I was shopping 88, trying to find a publisher for it, and getting nowhere. I got hundreds and hundreds of rejections from agents and publishers and stuff. Um, couldn't sell it. And at the time, I thought it was because I didn't have any sort of a, street cred as an author. I'd never published anything, never mind a book. I'd never published a short story. So I decided the path to, literary success was to write some amazing short stories and publish those in magazines, a whole bunch of like really, famous professional magazines, build up like a level of fame there. And then people would, sort of look at my books and recognize me for the incredible genius I am. And so I wrote a short story, and every single magazine on the planet said no. And so I was like, fuck, wrote another short story. And every magazine on the planet was like, no. And so that kept going. Over a year later, over a year of writing short stories and submitting them, I racked in over 100 rejection letters.
Wow.
Um, and then I sold my first short story, this like cute little story, Artificial Stupidity, to a Canadian science fiction magazine called On Spec. In I think I sold it in 2010, and then it appeared in 2011. And you got to remember, like I started in 2008. That was 2 years of zero success. 3 years before I actually got to see one of my stories in print. Um, And, when I sold that first story, I was like, yes, I have made it. Now they will buy my stories. And then it was another year and about another 100 rejections before I sold a second story.
Wow.
Um, And at that point, I kind of started realizing that nobody gives a shit about short stories.
Mm.
Publishers, they don't look at your short story sales and go, "Oh, look, he sold short stories. Let's buy his book." They read your book, and if your book is shit, they're not going to pick it up. So I needed to learn how to write better books.
So you
But
changed your focus then.
yeah, so I'd written a pile of short stories, and then since 2011, I had more success selling short stories. At first,
Mm.
landed a couple in pro markets, and then later after like Beyond Redemption came out and I'd sold some books. At that point, people started coming to me and asking for short stories, like for anthologies and stuff. Which that's a whole different beast from sending out stories and bringing rejection letters. So, I don't remember what year I published the collection, but I realized I had a book's worth of short stories
Wow.
just sitting around, like not doing anything at that point. And, I'd sold them each one. I think you typically sell rights for about a year or so.
Hmm.
And none of them had been published for a while. So I thought I'd put together this little anthology of my own stuff, really just for like the half dozen hardcore fans who are going to read it and be like, "Oh, cool! Like that's where that came from." And like you can see the evolution of some of the ideas. Like there's some manifest delusion stuff in there. There's actually Norilska Groans. You can see where the idea for the stones from Norilska Groans came from in
Hmm.
some of the cyberpunk stories, because that's where I sort of like ripped that idea from. Um, and then I always liked the idea of introducing each short story and just sort of talking about it a bit and about where I was. And because again, the assumption is six people are going to read this, and it's going to be the six people who are like, "Yeah, I like Mike." And so I wanted to talk to them.
Right.
So I just, like brutally honest, sort of like shared where I was at when that particular story was written. It's a lot of fun.
Nice. And I think I mentioned to you before we went live, but I tried to avoid the introduction parts. Otherwise, I try not to, so I can think of stuff to ask you. But I did also wonder, is there a rhyme or reason to the order of the stories in the book? Did you have, it's kind of like picking out a track list for an album. Did you put a
Yeah.
whole lot of thought into it?
Do I actually have a copy? Well, that's embarrassing. I don't have a copy. I think I sold my last one. Um, there was, and I can't remember what that rhyme or reason was. Um, in part, like at first, I was thinking to do it chronologically so you could sort of see the growth.
Mhm.
In the end, I didn't do that because I wanted to sort of bounce between genres and sort of chronologically didn't work. In the end, I there was it was all feel based.
Hmm.
I want to separate the science fiction from the fantasy, like sort of spread them out more rather than having like the front half all science fiction, back half all fantasy kind of
Yeah.
thing. So there was some thought into it, but not a ton.
How tough is writing a fantasy short story? Because there's not a lot. There's a ton of horror short stories. I find it there's horror short stories everywhere, and I love short stories anyway. But you don't see a whole lot of fantasy or science fiction short stories. I mean, I don't at least. Is there something that you do to write a short story that's fantasy or science fiction based? Because you have to build a world around it. How is that difficult to do?
Yeah, I mean, I find short stories a lot more difficult than full length novels, um, especially fantasy. You've got a very small amount of time, space, words to put your world and your character into the reader's head.
Hmm.
In a novel, you can take chapters to do that. You can take an entire novel, slowly putting it all in there, and the reader's going to be happy. They get to discover it over hundreds of thousands of words. They're blissful. Short story, you've got 4,000 words to get a whole world in there, or at least the important parts, and to have a character strong enough to carry it all. And that's really difficult. And I would say I'm not good at it.
Hmm.
I much prefer novel length stuff. I find that a lot easier.
Hmm. And Harfoot says, as someone who wasn't always a big reader growing up, short stories were always a great gateway to eventually reading full length books and epics.
Yeah, I read a ton of short story stuff when I was a kid. I used to get the science fiction best of anthologies like all the time, plow through those, and would often use them to find new writers.
Mm, yeah. And for this collection, I kind of and a lot of your stories have this little tint of humor in this like Curb Your Enthusiasm kind of humor in all of them. And Anna Smith Spark, I talked to her yesterday, and she said that you're great at injecting humility or making your characters seem like human beings, like giving them, rounding them out and giving them humanity when they may be even awful people. So even the awful characters, there's still something in there that you can see some hope or something good in them.
Yeah, I mean that's always my goal. Is I find the idea of like good guys and bad guys, good and evil, right and wrong, yeah, largely horse shit. The world's a lot more gray than that, and I want them to be people. Not they're never characters to me. I don't think of any of the characters in the book as a character. They are not there to serve the story. So they're not going to make choices based on what the story needs. And I'm very much a get in the head of the character and be that person as I'm writing, which is what makes plotting books a fucking pain in the ass. Because no matter what I think should happen, when I'm in the character's head, when I am that character, if they see something else that makes more sense, they're going to do it.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. Well, you know that I'm a sucker for Beyond Redemption and Manifest Illusions. I'm a sucker for that. I'm waiting for that third book, but I'm no pressure. But so the first story was, and you're gonna have to tell me what the names because I probably mispronounced the names. Anomi, is that the right
Yeah,
pronunciation?
anime.
Enemy.
Yeah.
Okay, I told you. So this is one of the characters from Beyond Redemption. Was this written before or after Manifest Illusions?
What was the story called?
Intellectual property.
Oh, that's right. Okay, so that was way predates Manifest Illusion stuff.
Hmm.
Um, Intellectual Property was written 2009. That's the one that appeared in Interzone, the UK magazine.
I can find it. Let's see.
Yeah, 2011 or 2012 that one appeared in Interzone. That's science fiction, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
I had totally forgotten that I used that name there.
Really?
I do. Yeah, I do. I reuse names. I mean, enemy, it actually means something. So I tend to do that
Hmm.
fair amount, which is grab words where not everyone is going to necessarily immediately recognize it as a word, and use it as a name just because it entertains me, and it's kind of why I do all this shit.
Especially, and you may not even remember this, but one of the lines I wrote down was, "What do you call a Wookiee? What do you call a Wookiee with an ass fetish?"
Yeah, yeah, Star Wars joke. I never had a punchline to it. I just had this scene in my head where this person is sort of like the security guard has to ask these weird questions and then measure neural activity of the person sort of passing through, and all of it was part of like the making sure they are who they say they are kind of thing. And that was just it. The question popped into my head. I had no idea what the answer was, and just I laughed. So it got in there.
Yeah, it's a good one. Uh, it's interesting when you read all the short stories in a collection of obsessions. Some of the characters are allowed to change. Some cannot escape their path.
Yeah, that's sort of a collection of my obsessions. Is I've got uh I seesaw between thinking humans are people are largely incapable of growth and change, and that's
Hmm.
beyond redemption. Everyone ends the book as shitty as they were when they began it. And sometimes that's real to me. And then sometimes I'm like, nah, that's dark. That's bullshit. People can grow, people can be better, and they can change and they can learn. And then, I go back and forth.
Yeah. So I did think it was because they talked about Google tracking us, and I thought it's even more interesting to me now knowing that you wrote it so long ago because it's rings. It's like, are we that far away from this?
Yeah, I read it sorry, wrote it so long ago, I barely remember it. Was there stuff on identity tracking in there? I
Yeah.
honestly, I don't remember.
Yeah, the tracker, I forget the name of the chip that they would, so when they were at work, they would put it in and a few
Oh, the
different
memory plug stuff.
memory
Yeah,
plug.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, we're a little ways off that, but honestly, if you're protecting intellectual property, it makes so much sense for the company to want to take hold of that, and they will do that the moment that sort of technology is available.
Oh, yeah. But it was almost like a horror story because you don't know what you do when you're at work. You don't remember anything. You go to work
Mhm.
and you come out and it's
Yeah,
like you're
and
two
it can feel like a blessing because, like, if your job's shitty, you get to unplug at the end of the day, and you're like, "Yeah."
Yeah.
He's like, "Well, I don't know what happened, but I feel fine." You go home a little tired, sort of wondering what you did.
Yeah. Especially like you may not remember the couple when the husband got home and he would ask his wife, "How was your day?" "I don't know." "How was yours?" "I don't know." There's little tints of humor in there just to, kind of break
Yeah.
up the darkness. So the Broken Dead, the second story, was also with the same character, but I thought this one was probably the most emotional one in the in the in the collection because of she had to die for this poem to be completed, and she's like a sacrificial lamb. And so the end I thought was a dark, happy ending.
Yeah, that was, kind of an odd story, but very much written about a relationship I was sort of watching happen at the time
Mhm,
with a singer slash poet in this sort of goth band who was the, poet in the story,
mhm.
uh, and his sort of, his girlfriend. And it was just such a, like, a messed up relationship. I wanted to try and capture some of that, but, twist it into that Manifest Delusions world.
Mm. It worked. It was great. And so the third one was Death at the Pass, and I did take a peek at the introduction on this one because you noted that it was RPG inspired, and it ties into the Blackstone Heart world. It's the wizard that was born again and brought back to life after being dead and in servitude. And I caught some themes of some free will themes in this one.
Yep. Yeah. So that was, like, originally way, way back. I ran a very long running Stormbringer campaign, based on the Elric books. That's where the Obsidian Path stuff comes from. That's where the uh, Death and Dignity, Death of the Past, those short stories came from. Um, yeah, and free will and who you are has always been sort of, an obsession for me. Like, what defines you as a person? Like, if you change your memories, does that change who you are? If you change the order of your memories, yeah, I think you'll find that probably sneaks into a lot of my stories.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And for anyone watching, the collection is available on Kindle Unlimited, so check that out. It's Go check it out, Kindle Unlimited. The next one was A Second Chance. It was one of your first stories, and you noted that I did pick at this one too, but you noted that you resist the urge to go back and rewrite your older stories. Is that tough to not want to go back and smooth things out?
Yeah, I mean, especially publishing them, like, making them available for people to read. Um, they're rough. Like, it's like any skill, right? You get better at it. And to look at something you'd done years ago, and that one I wrote, I gotta remember, sometime in the 90s, I think, like,
Wow.
long before I'd written anything else. There were a couple of short stories in that collection, as I recall, that were written originally in the 90s,
Hmm.
and then totally forgotten. When I started putting together the collection, I ended up calling a friend of mine who I used to live with, who is like a data pack rat,
Hmm.
and saying, "Do you have any of those old stories?" And about a week later, he got back to me and was like, "Yeah, I have them all." And it was in some like Word 2 format or something like that. Um, so yeah, there was the urge to like rewrite and polish them and make them all, as slick as I am capable. I didn't think that was as interesting though. I mean, again, because of the the collection is for those six people who are gonna like buy it.
Yeah.
I thought they'd be more interested in seeing like what my stuff was like when I
Mhm.
first thought, "Oh, I'm gonna write a short story," like in '94 or whatever it was,
Wow.
So, um, yeah, I thought they were more interesting as they were, rather than me sort of changing them and making it seem like, "Oh, I've always been a writer." It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's been a long road, and some of my early stuff it sucks.
I thought this was I actually enjoyed this with the clones and the Crime and Punishment thing, how you handle I thought that was a neat idea. I'm surprised it was one of your newer or one of your oldest stories. Enjoy that one. So we have the summer of '79, and I couldn't get that stupid song out of my head the whole time I was reading this one, the summer of '69. So you mentioned there was a childhood story. I was wondering what inspired that story. It was how much of this is true to life?
Yeah, it's a combination of childhood memories, like sort of cherry picked over about a decade of vacations, of family vacations. Like literally from 79 kind of on. Um and so that there's scenes along the beach in Lake Huron. Some of those are, you know, semi-real dreamlike versions of what I remember. Stuff at the cottage, my dad chopping his shin open with an axe, like that shit really happened.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, it was this sort of a fond reminiscence of barely remembered vacations.
I thought it captured youth. The kind of the story it gave you that feeling of the adventure kind of you want to go on an adventure kind of thing, and you get lost for the day doing something.
Yep, that was me as a kid.
Yeah. And Harfa says, I like seeing what it was like for someone to actually be the living dead, looking at your body falling apart, the horror of having your head chopped off, and being stuck in one spot forever. And Andres says, several stories play with the idea of characters having no memories of events, whether in memory plug stories or in the ones A Second Chance. Could you talk about your literary influences there?
Hmm.
Good question.
Yeah. So the memory stuff, probably my biggest literary influence there is George Alec Effinger, science fiction writer. He died a while back. Uh, he wrote, I'm going to butcher the name because it's been a while. I think it was called the Marudin sequence or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, he wrote a series of novels where characters could buy personality plugs, and so you could plug in different personalities to sort of change who you were. And many were based on like famous people, like you could buy Elvis or Chuck Norris kind of thing. And I loved that idea. And the memory plug stuff uh, fell out of those stories. That was me sort of taking somebody else's idea and twisting it, see where I could sort of like take it. Um, And then, I mean, it's me being me, it always turns dark because I'm sort of like, well, how do we abuse this now? You've got this technology. Like, who's going to use this and, make it dark for me?
Always the optimist.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question though. So the next one was let's see, death and dignity, diplomacy and I wrote down this quote: diplomacy and negotiations were always easiest when backed with a sharp blade. And especially like the after the severed head is smashed and the who's laughing now, bitch. Like the
Always subtle.
obviously, yeah, it was great. That was another fun one. Just the humor is because otherwise, I guess you almost need some humor to lighten up the some of the stories, right? But I think that's just your personality. I don't think that's something
Yeah.
you.
I honestly, I never put thought into it. Like, I don't think about pacing, which might be a weakness of mine. But, at no point am I like, this has been dark and gloomy for a while. I should put some humor in here. How do I be funny? Like, I don't think I could do that. I'd just stare blankly at a wall. But as the story's coming, the characters, and again, like in my head, I am each of the characters. Um, they just say shit, and I'm like, "Oh fuck, that was funny." Like, in it goes.
Yeah. And this is interesting because you also have a lot of playing around with memories in Philip K. Dick.
Yep. Yeah, I read a ton of Philip K. Dick when I was a kid. That was so long ago. I don't remember a ton of it.
Hmm.
But definitely, like a lot of the classic science fiction um, is, like background influences for me.
Yeah.
It's so long ago. I don't clearly remember how it sort of influenced.
Mhm. When you have influences that are really heavy influences and you sit down to write something, is there ever a concern to not just be a carbon copy of something else? Because, did you ever just say, well, is this an exact replica of what is influencing me?
Yeah. I It's not something I worry about because I never just take something somebody else has done and then copy it.
Yeah.
For me, like influences are best when they trigger ideas. And so like the memory plugs, George Alec Effinger was doing personality plugs, and I was like, oh, cool. Where do I take that?
Yeah.
You know, Stormbringer, huge influence on me, probably like one of the biggest influences. And um, at no point do I really quite copy Stormbringer.
Mhm.
It's always like, oh, how do I take some of those ideas and twist them? How do I sort of like play with that differently?
Hmm. Yeah, because even with YouTube, there's been channels that I've always enjoyed, and then I find myself doing the exact same thing they do, and I think you just do it like without thinking about it. So
Huh.
that's why I can never be a writer because I would just write
It,
whatever I
that's how
love.
it starts. I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, Ghosts of Tomorrow was me trying to write Snow Crash
Hmm.
and failing really badly. I think that's the other reason I don't worry about copying people because I'm so bad at it. No one will recognize what I was trying to do.
Okay, so the next one was commuter, the home Sean versus work Sean. In the I kind of I kind of took this as the daily grind, like distracted versus unplugging. Not seeing what you have in the day to day and just kind of living for the weekend and not seeing what's in front of you and not appreciating what you have is what kind of my takeaway was.
Yep. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, Sean Headley, the main character. Sean Headley was the drummer in a goth metal band I played in for a bunch of years, and so he had the perfect name for this sort of cubicle drone.
Yeah.
And funny because like years later, years after the band broke up, I got an email from him, and for some reason he Googled his name, like for work purposes or something, and that short story, was out there online and stuff. He was like, "What, dude? What?" And he loved it because it was kind of very much captured part of where his life was at the time. So that was a lot of fun. But yeah, that's the office cubicle grind, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And we have Trill Nathan's here. He's your biggest fan.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Is that weird?
Fans, yeah, I'm just some schlub writing, with my weird stories at home.
I don't know. You have a lot of fans out there. I'm one of them, so it's kind of weird. Kent Lament, how do you as a name for a sword? Oh yeah.
um, okay, so that Can't Lament, that the name of that sword was taken from the Stormbringer campaign. One of the characters, like the player characters, rose up to be Theocrat of Pantang, which was the Mabden, the human empire, versus the Melnibonians. Um, and the player actually was genius. The Mabden very much mimicked and were trying to copy the sort of the better Melnibonians, and so the player played his character to the T. He's this human sorcerer, basically trying to live up to the Melnibonians. And of course, the moment he has enough demonology to bind something to a sword, he's trying to make his own Stormbringer kind of thing. And the character named the player rather named the sword Can't Lament. And the sword's whole name was Can't Lament Kren, but it basically got called Can't Lament all the time. And then when I came to write the novel, I was digging through my old campaign notes looking for, info and digging up stuff. And I found that and I was like, oh, fuck yeah. And then it occurred to me it was sort of a funny joke, because we talked about sorrow and stuff and can't lament, as in incapable of feeling lamentation or sorrow. And it really it stuck. And it was one of those weird little things from 93, 94.
Wow. There's some old notes. Yes.
Oh yeah, no, I've got the original Stormbringer box with the books and all the old character sheets and demons and
Wow.
stuff in it.
That's
Yeah.
cool. So the next one was something I think we can all relate to in some way is less than 2020, where the future me wants me to do all the work and enjoy the rewards. So the present me has to do all the work. The future me wants to enjoy the rewards, and the constant battle to stay motivated and to not remain short sighted.
Yeah. Yeah, that was so the character in that is an audio engineer, working in shitty rock clubs, mixing bands. That was me. That was what I was doing. I did that for just shy of 2 decades. Mixed bands in clubs, did live sound. Um, and the story was based on the character was someone I knew, another audio engineer, and who had basically been evicted and was living in the basement of the club, which was
Wow.
like a cockroach infested shithole. And he'd come up from the basement like after the club had closed and sit on the stage. Back then, you could drink, you could smoke in bars. That's how long ago this was.
I remember. Yeah.
And sometimes, like if I was working that night, this is like way predating marriage and kids and stuff, of course. I'd stay late after work and we'd turn all the stage lights on. We'd drag a table and chairs up onto the stage from the club and we'd set up drinks and ashtrays and we would sit on the stage under the stage lights drinking and smoking and just talking shit until it's time to go home, like
Yeah.
7 in the morning or whatever it was.
Waffle House time, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a somewhere between fond memories and fuck, what the hell was I thinking?
Yeah. And just as a side note, P. Craig Russell's adaptation of Stormbringer came out last year in the Michael Moorcock Library of Graphic Novels.
Ooh, cool. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, I didn't know that. So the next one was Personality Pirate, and I wondered. I think I know who the grandpa in the Metallica T-shirt is, and that's you, right?
Yeah, that's at least part me. Yeah.
And the other thing is how technology affects childhood now, and thinking back to I think of because I went to school like in the '90s, and thinking back to how different it is for kids now with technology. It's a whole different world. So just how different our experiences are with technology, the rate it's moving is something that
Yeah.
is really fascinating.
Yeah, that was one of the stories that I wrote when I was trying to, land sales to earn, street cred as a writer. So that would have been written like 2008, 2009. I think I wrote that.
Wow. You've been in the game a long time, Fletcher.
Yeah, well, like largely unnoticed. More like trying to get into the game for a long time and then kind of in the game for the last, couple of years.
No, doing good. Yeah. That's pretty interesting. It's a long grind. It sounds like it's
Yeah. I mean, you look back and a smarter person probably would have quit, or done something else or just been like, yeah, it's my hobby and I'm fine with that. And I was never fine with it being a hobby. It's not what I wanted, so I worked like a fucking psycho. Kind of crazy, like sacrifice sleep, stop seeing friends. It's a little nuts. It's not really healthy,
it's an
or it
obsession.
wasn't. It's getting
Yeah,
better now.
yeah, that's good. And the next one was character is what you are. Uh, One of the quotes from this one was character is what you are in the light. It was another memory plug story.
Yep. So this is going back a while. Uh, Character is what you are in the dark. I actually can't remember where that first came from. That's not me. I didn't make that up. I learned it from
Yeah, it was in the book. I forget it was from a TV show in the
no,
60s.
a movie, from a movie, Buckaroo Banzai and, Buckaroo Banzai, you have to see it. Brilliant fucking movie.
Hmm.
Characters what you are in the dark is one of the characters yells that at somebody else. It's completely mental. So, yeah, that line came from there. I think it had been taken from somewhere else originally that I can't remember. Um, but I like the idea of, like, in the end, he sort of, it comes back to his father, and his father had always said, "Character is what you are in the dark."
Mhm,
And the idea of like, no, it's when you sort of when you step out into the light, when you sort of finally seen yourself,
mhm.
that's character.
And Star says across the eighth dimension.
There we go. That's it. Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension. Brilliant movie.
Yeah. No matter where you are, no matter where you go, there you are.
You are, yeah. So many amazing lines from that movie.
Yeah. And personality pirate is such a bittersweet story.
Yeah, it's one of those I could never sell.
Really?
I liked it though. I liked the character in that a lot.
Wow, there's so many stories in here that I thought were just really great, and then to hear you say you couldn't sell it is kind of depressing.
Eh,
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought it was good though, and the whole the best friends dating, and the one it was really it was one of those. I heard the Kirby Enthusiasm theme song at the end of that one. Kind of the all these weird things happening, and it's kind of this dry humor. And Buckaroo Banzai is amazing. These memory plug stories are really good.
cool. Thank you. They were a lot of fun. Yeah, like I said, that's Neuralska Groans, the recent book with Clayton. Uh, that was me porting those science fiction ideas into a fantasy setting, which kind of worked out surprisingly well.
Yeah, I'd say. And so the next one was a flash fiction. Is that I always get the name wrong? I believe
Yeah,
the
yeah, that's the short one, right? The really it's what 1,200 words or something, maybe I can't remember.
I loved it. It was so great. Thought it was short, but it was really touching.
Yeah, couldn't sell that either.
Wow. Yeah.
But yeah, I like that one. That's the he's afraid of dying. He becomes a spaceship. He ends up mining temperature differentials in dying black holes at the end of time,
Hmm.
because it turns out the universe expands forever. And yeah, well, that's enjoy the grass and the birds and go outside and spend some time while you can.
Yeah. Yeah. It was. That's kind of the. Do you really want to live forever?
Yeah, and yes, I do.
Yeah.
Mostly out of curiosity. I just want to see all the shit that comes next.
Yeah. You can write lots of books that way too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So the next one was just like the rain, and nothing. Well, the line that I wrote down here was nothing prepares you for getting old, and that was it was a dog the dog story.
Yeah.
I'm a dog lover, so that was another one that was.
Yeah, that was like kind of I wanted to step out of my comfort zone. It's not science fiction, it's not fantasy, it's just a, an old guy and his dogs. And I wanted to try and write something with emotional impact,
Mhm.
and that was it.
Yeah. Mission accomplished there. Trill Nathan says, I think The Broken Dead was my favorite. I'm definitely not biased because of its manifest delusions. Nope. Yeah, anything with manifest. I'm a sucker for anything manifest delusions. So the next one was, I think we mentioned it a little bit ago, is artificial stupidity, which I thought was hilarious. Uh, or surprised when all it wants to do is eat grilled cheese sandwiches and masturbate.
Yeah, that's right. So they we humanity creates an AI and they expect it to be, super intelligent and very, very useful. And it's not because it's a little bit lazy and it's not super interested in being useful because who the fuck is? And it decides, oddly, that it wants to become a science fiction writer. And so it writes. At the time, I was reading a bunch about organic computers because that was sort of like going to be all the rage, which hasn't really happened yet. Um, so it writes this artificial intelligence writes a short story about an organic computer that achieves sentience, and then all it really wants to do is sort of sit around masturbating and writing science fiction stories. It seemed like a fun twist. That was the first story that ever actually sold.
Yeah. So I was. How does that work? So you send it out to magazines or to anthologies or whatever. How does that? So if someone says, "Yes, I want to buy this story," how does that process work?
So I mean, that was 2009, 2010 that sold.
Mm,
Back then, most magazines did not accept emailed submissions. So you printed, double spaced your submission, you put it into an envelope, you mailed it a physical copy at cost to yourself,
mm,
and then they would mail you back a tiny little piece of paper that basically said "fuck off, no," which would take anywhere from a month to a year for your
wow.
rejection to show up. In that case, they mailed back and were like, "Yeah, we really like this. We want to buy it." Uh, they've got a set rate. They mail me a contract, sign the contract, mail that back, and this is all physical mail, right? They mail me a check, and then a year and a half later, it actually showed up in the magazine.
Wow. For a short story.
Yeah. Oh, that's how it was back then.
Wow. That's what a that would really suck. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the rest is a very touching story. I think he's referring to
Yeah.
just like the rain. Very touching story. A friend has a dog that's 19 years old now. Incontinence and dementia show up. Some heart issues, but for its age, the story made me think of my friend's dog.
Yeah. I would hope that anyone who has or loves dogs could relate to that story a little bit. Oh,
Oh yeah.
incontinence and dementia. I'm like, is she talking about me?
If he was, you'll forget later, so don't worry
Yeah.
about it. Yeah. Morrow says practically the dark ages. You know, it was
Yeah.
snail mail. Yeah. I'm surprised they weren't accepting email
Some
submissions.
some would.
Oh,
Some of the bigger ones, a lot wouldn't. I used to buy stamps by the book,
mm,
because I was constantly mailing out short stories, and at the time I was trying to sell 88. And so a lot of agents or those publishers accepting unagented submissions, you would physically mail a printout of like the first 3 chapters, your abysmally bad cover letter and synopsis, all that shit in a big envelope.
wow.
It sucked. And then you'd wait 6 months. I remember 88 got picked up by a small publisher in 2013. 2 years later, I received another rejection for it.
Mm, wow.
Like that's how long you sometimes waited for that stuff.
Shoving salt on the wound there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the next one was Fire and Flesh. Of course, another manifest delusions. So just, you start the name, I'm going to mispronounce the name. Is it Gahirin?
Yeah. Gahern. I don't speak German, so technically I don't actually know how to pronounce it.
Okay. I'll just go with whatever you say,
Yep.
just so we're the same. And it was just want someone to talk to.
Yep. Yep. A story about friendship and, picking the wrong friends and sort of being alone and lonely.
Mhm.
Um, that one was that was like the first Manifest Illusions that was written before the books were,
Mm.
before Beyond Redemption, because I was still playing around with I was playing around with what the world was going to look like. I think back then I had different terms for the different types of, delusionists, Geistenkranken. There were pyrocasts was
Mm.
instead of Hasbrands, and different names for a whole bunch of stuff. But some of the same characters kind of appeared in later stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting because I would have, if I would have had to have bet, I would have said you wrote this after, but That's interesting. But yeah, I'm a sucker for anything manifest delusions. Then this one, I think one of these manifest delusion stories you mentioned that you would switch genders for characters and see how different the story would be. What have you found is different for your storytelling when you change the genders?
Um, my favorite thing to do if I gender swap, because sometimes first drafts I don't put a ton of thought into. The story kind of like rough comes out in a quick rush. So it's they're a little lazy, I find.
Hmm.
But if I swap two characters, but then don't change other stuff, um, so now you've got a female character written with whatever your male mental background bullshit is, um, and it just it puts it in a different place.
Hmm.
It sort of steps you back a little bit from the normal, from the preconceptions, from writing the same old shit, and it changes the dynamics of the relationships to me in interesting ways, um, which I think you need to do. Like I do that fairly often, where I will just swap genders and rewrite entire novels, to see how it impacts characters.
Wow.
Almost always, it's better.
Hmm. Interesting. As a German, it feels strange to me. I'm sorry. As a German, it feels strange to read the German names with their weird grammar, but the names work very well the way you invent them.
Yeah, I butchered a lot of that. I don't know German at all. That was very much me and Google Translate. And I think what a lot of people don't get is I didn't write Beyond Redemption going, oh, this is going to be published by a Big Five publisher and it will be available worldwide. Like my first book, I think sold 32 copies,
Hmm.
and I wasn't sure if anyone was going to buy this one. Um, and certainly I didn't think I was going to get an agent, didn't think it would get published. And so I was writing it for like a couple of close friends, and they don't speak German. And I thought, what would be really funny is I'm going to hide some like little Easter eggs in these German names, and hints of like about plot or character stuff. Um, and that was it. Like I never expected it to get published, and then when the publisher picked it up, I was kind of like, well, they're going to want to change all these names, and they just didn't. Like, whoa, okay. But I love the way it feels. I love the way the German names sound. I think that they fit really well for that sort of dark, grimdark kind of setting.
Yeah, they do. And so the last one was I'm sorry, second to last one was the Invisible Assassin, and it was your first story. And I wondered what it was like to reflect back and reread your first story now that you've come so far.
Yeah, it was really neat because I that was one of the ones that I'd lost and my friend dug up,
Mm.
the digital pack rat. Um, it was neat to see these ideas, 20 years later and realize that they weren't outdated. There was stuff that I did, would need to be changed if you sort of were going to try and publish it. But the actual like ideas, the tech stuff, like kind of aged surprisingly well. Um, and funny, so that was the first. I think that was the first short story I ever actually finished writing. It never got published. I don't think I submitted it. I wrote it and lost it. Never thought about it again for years. Um, then intellectual property was me trying to rewrite that story from memory, because it's kind of the same story. And so I was like, oh, how did that happen? And I could kind of remember the plot, and I got a ton of stuff wrong. But it's literally me trying to remember a short story I'd written, 15 years earlier, and
Yeah.
rewriting it.
Wow, that's pretty neat. And so the last one was probably my favorite story, I think, of the collection, the Undying Lands. So creative and immersive, and you can really you really feel like you're there. The way that you describe the environment and the situation, and it's such an interesting concept. This this battle, that this gladiator type thing that's going on. Where did that idea come from?
So the Undying Lands, That actually takes place in the Obsidian Path world. There are hints at that in the background. There's wizardry, necromancy, and all that stuff. Um, and it touches on a little bit the Death at the Past short story. So Death at the Past, a necromancer raises this huge army of the dead, and she fucks up. She messes up the spell, and everything raises up. And then anything that dies in that area afterwards raises, becomes, comes not back to life, but becomes undead as well. And so the Undying Lands was sort of like, okay, 1,000 years later, somebody's built an arena there, because like that's what you do. Like, how can we make a buck off this? And
Yeah.
so they've built an arena there so that they can have gladiatorial fights where people die and then come back to life and can keep fighting, because that's fun. Yeah, and that's I think part of why that story kind of works is because it's so narrowly focused. There's no real attempt at doing much beyond the arena, and because it's such a that you only get to see that tiny little bit of the world, you get to resist the temptation to cram in all the background world building you did that's completely unnecessary.
Yeah. Another story that ends on a dark but hopeful note, even though you don't have a lot of uh, don't have a lot of hope, but the end I thought was in a grim, dark kind of way is uplifting.
Yeah, that was a fun story. That was a I can't remember who did that for an anthology. Was that Grimdark magazine? I can't remember.
Maybe it's in your introduction.
But that was fun. Being hired to write a story is way more fun than writing a story and then sending it off for your rejection letter.
Yeah, it was guaranteed. And it
Yeah,
was
when a magazine says we're going to pay you this, write as a story, it's like, yeah, cool.
it was published in an anthology called The Art of War.
Oh, that's right. That was Book Nest's Art of War anthology. That was cool.
It was and all the proceeds went to Doctors Without Borders.
Yep. Yeah, Petros put that together.
Right. Wow. So it was all connected. And Morrow loves the story. And there's a story that needs to be told about the necromancer if you haven't already done that.
Oh, yeah, she's well, the original. She's in Death at the Pass,
Mm.
but she's kind of a secondary character there. There could definitely be more there.
There's some more ideas for you. So yeah, I really enjoyed the collection. And if those of you who haven't read it yet, go out and pick it up. It's available on Kindle Unlimited. Go check it out. It's if I like it, I keep mentioning, but I love the anything Manifest Illusions. I'm eating it up. So
Yep. I'm hoping by the end of the year, if all goes well, last book will be out.
yeah, I've been watching the Patreon updates every day. I scramble to go read what the little thing you post. So yeah, I'm excited to see that. Again, I always hate to feel like I'm putting pressure on you authors. Like I want it now, but it's like
No,
when
I
it's ready,
get it. I
I'll,
get
I'll
it.
be in line waiting when it's ready. But yeah, I'll be rereading the first two books and get geared up for the third one when it's ready to go. But I know you're busy, have lots of books to read and short stories to write and send off snail mail. So I appreciate you coming by to talk about the collection. Hopefully, more people will give it a read if they haven't already.
Yeah, and thanks for inviting me on. This was fun.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, well, it's interesting to hear your perspective, and I try to avoid the like I mentioned before each story, but it's cool to hear your experience, and it's like a snapshot of your history, and so I think that was a good approach to kind of give us as fans a chance to see kind of through your eyes what you were going through, or your perspective at the time.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that there honesty is more fun than pretending to be cool or
Yeah.
successful. Like, I'd rather people read it and go like, "Oh my god, his early short stories are shit. I could write that." Because if you can, then you can do all the later shit too. It just means you got to keep practicing.
Yeah, it's a grind for sure. And thanks for suggesting the book, and thanks for joining and commenting on your stories, Michael.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks
Yeah,
for hanging out with us too.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, thanks for coming by and some great questions too. So thanks for interacting with us. But cool, thanks everyone for coming by. And if you haven't read it, go pick it up, go give it a read. Kindle Unlimited, or you can buy the awesome, cool copy like us, paperback lovers have. go check it out. Thanks again, Michael, and we'll see everybody later.
All right. Take care, man.